She didn't belong, at least not in their eyes. One glance, and they had already decided. She was too calm, too quiet, too certain for someone who, in their minds, shouldn't be there at all. A black woman standing still outside a place of power was enough to trigger suspicion. No badge, no uniform, no visible purpose. That's all it took. The man who confronted her didn't ask questions. He issued commands. Within minutes, she was in cuffs, accused of loitering on a property she supposedly had no business being near. But what no one realized was that everything around them, the marble beneath their feet, the tower behind the glass, even the very paycheck he clutched, was hers. The fallout wouldn't just expose one mistake. It would reveal a whole system built on assumptions. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just silence the crowd. It would shatter reputations. If this story hits you already, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment with where you're watching from. I want to know, how soon did you sense something was wrong? And what would you have done? The morning light poured across the Wacth Plaza like a promise, catching on the curves of its steel and glass architecture. Pedestrians surged forward on their morning commute, absorbed in podcasts and caffeine, oblivious to the woman standing alone in the heart of the plaza. Sybil Mercer stood with her spine straight and her shoulders relaxed. A slim leather notebook clutched to her chest. Her dress was understated, a slate gray sheath beneath a crisp beige trench coat, and her low heels echoed faintly against the granite steps she herself had selected during construction 3 years earlier. Sybil wasn't here for attention. She didn't want applause or praise. She had come quietly, without her team or her title, to see for herself what her tenants had begun whispering to her in vague, uncomfortable phrases: discrimination, profiling, suspicion. If the place felt wrong to them, she needed to feel it too. It wasn't long before she did. From inside the Union Federal Bank branch, her property's largest tenant, a figure emerged. The man moved like he had something to prove. Troy Bannon, 41, ex-military with a belly that contradicted the memory of combat, wore his security badge like a sheriff's star and a scowl like a second skin. His eyes locked on Sybil as if she had set off an internal alarm. "Hey," he barked, marching up with exaggerated authority. "You can't stand here." Sybil blinked, calm. "I'm not blocking anything." "Doesn't matter," he said, hands on hips. "This is private property. You're loitering." "This is public-facing retail space," she replied evenly. "I'm not loitering. I'm observing." "Don't get smart," he snapped. "People like you always have an excuse." The word stung, not just in tone, but in implication. Sybil looked him over once, briefly, and considered walking away. But part of her refused. "People like me?" she asked. "What exactly does that mean?" Troy snorted. "Don't play the race card. It's not going to work here. I asked you to move." He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder. "That way. Off the property." "No," she said simply. "I have business here." "Business?" He laughed loud and mocking. "Sure you do. Got a meeting with your parole officer too." A few passers-by chuckled from the sidewalk. Others turned their heads quickly and kept walking. Sybil didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened slightly on her notebook. "You're making a mistake," she said. Troy stepped closer. "Lady, you either show me some ID or you walk. If you don't do one, I'll help you with the other." She reached into her coat, slowly, pulling out a wallet. "You want to see ID?" No, he sneered. "Too late now. You want to be difficult? I can play that game. In fact," he motioned behind him, "I'm calling it in." The bank's interior doors opened, and 2 additional guards emerged, one already speaking into a phone. Sybil's expression stayed steady, but the air seemed to thin around her. "We got a female, mid-40s, refusing to leave the premises," the guard said to the dispatcher. "Possible trespasser." Troy stepped forward and yanked the notebook from Sybil's grip. It fell, slapping the concrete. "You'll pick that up after you're off the property," he muttered. "Let's go." When she didn't move, he grabbed her arm, not brutally but hard enough to assert control. Sybil stumbled forward a step, her lips pressed together in restrained disbelief. "This is unnecessary," she said. "I can call the building manager." "Go ahead," he said, smiling now. "Let them know I'm doing my job." "I am the building manager," she started to say, but the moment was gone. The police were already pulling into the curb. Two officers stepped out, one tall and expressionless, the other, younger, hesitated as he took in the scene. "What's going on here?" Officer Bryant asked. "She's trespassing," Troy answered before Sybil could speak. "Refused to leave, wouldn't show ID, got combative." "That's not true," she said, her voice sharp. Bryant glanced at his partner, who had already retrieved zip ties. "Ma'am, please cooperate." "I am cooperating," Sybil said. "This is a mistake." "I'm sure it is," Troy said, eyes gleaming. "Just wait till they sort it out downtown." The officers approached. "Hands behind your back, please." Sybil hesitated. This was her property, her building, her bank tenant, her stone steps. But no one cared. She turned slowly, hands behind her, and felt the cold sting of plastic tighten around her wrists. And certainly not the crowd, who had already reduced her to a clip on someone's social media feed. The ride was short. Instead of booking her, Officer Bryant, the younger of the two, pulled the car over 2 blocks away, stepping out to speak with his partner in low tones. Sybil leaned her head against the window, watching as pedestrians moved freely, unbothered, unaware that just minutes ago, she had been treated like a criminal in front of her own investment. Eventually, Bryant returned and opened the door. He looked uncomfortable, his mouth tight. "We're releasing you with a citation," he said. "Trespassing warning only. No charges." Sybil didn't move. "Am I allowed to return to my property?" she asked. Bryant shifted. "You'll have to take that up with building security." "I am building security," she said quietly. "And I'm the dam owner." Bryant didn't answer that. He cut the ties, handed her the citation, and closed the door. Sybil stood alone on the sidewalk, notebook still missing, wrist sore. She didn't go home. She walked back to Aldwych Plaza. She didn't care if it looked bold or foolish. She had to see what came next. When she turned the corner onto Main, the crowd had thinned, but a few lingered. Some still stood with phones out. Others gossiped in quiet voices, stealing glances her way. And Troy, he hadn't moved. He stood like a king atop granite stairs, watching her return with a smirk so condescending it churned her stomach. "You again," he said, his voice dripping with fake shock. "You got some nerve." Sybil didn't respond right away. She stepped forward, calm and measured. "You put your hands on me without cause," she said. "You falsely accused me. And I told you before, I have business here." Troy laughed, loud and theatrical, looking around as if inviting applause. "Lady, you've got some kind of fantasy playing in your head. You think because you're wearing heels and carrying a notebook, you own something." He took a deliberate step forward, closing the space between them. "Let me make this simple. You don't belong here. Go now, before I call again. Next time, I'll press charges." "This is my building," she said again, this time louder. 2 bystanders glanced over. Troy raised his hands dramatically. "Sure it is. And I'm the mayor." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "Don't push your luck. You want to yell ownership. Go do it somewhere that actually wants to hear it. Because out here, nobody gives a damn." He flicked his eyes over her, dismissive. "You think this little moment's going viral? You're nobody. Nobody cares." Sybil inhaled, held it, and slowly turned her back on him. She didn't give him the satisfaction of an argument. She walked past the plaza, rounding the corner until she disappeared from sight. Once out of view, she leaned against a brick wall, her hands trembling. Her throat tightened with rage and helplessness. Not because of what he said, but because she knew deep down today he might be right. The world didn't care. She could have told them the truth on camera. She could have pulled up documents, shown emails, revealed deeds. But they wouldn't have heard it. All they saw was what they chose to see. A black woman standing where they thought she shouldn't be. The next hour blurred. She walked. She cried once, silently in a church bathroom downtown, dabbing her face with paper towels, refusing to let herself spiral. By the time she returned to her office, a sleek, glass-cornered space on the top floor of another property she owned, her face had settled into steel. What mattered was that the people who had the authority to make decisions, police officers, building staff, bystanders, chose not to believe what they saw with their own eyes. They believed something else. Something ingrained. Something dangerous. At precisely 10:15 a.m., she stood from her desk, smoothed her blazer, and headed back to Aldwych Plaza. This time, she walked straight up to the steps, chin high, heart steady, and waited. Within minutes, Troy Bannon emerged again. His reaction was not of surprise, but of annoyance, as if Sybil's persistence were a personal inconvenience. "You don't give up, do you?" he said, stepping forward. "Back again? What part of get lost don't you understand?" Sybil didn't flinch. "I'm going inside," she said, "and you are not going to stop me. Is that right?" Troy replied, pulling out his radio. "Let's make this official again." She moved past him toward the door, but he blocked her path. Just then, a police cruiser pulled to the curb. It wasn't the same officers from the day before. This time, it was Officer Devin Slate, a man in his early 50s with a silver mustache and a close friendship with Troy, born from years of working the same circuit. Devin stepped out of the vehicle with casual authority, immediately greeting Troy like an old pal. "Morning, man. Got trouble again?" "Same woman from yesterday," Troy said, pointing toward Sybil. "Won't leave the property. Says she's got business here." Devin turned his eyes to Sybil, sizing her up in a glance that barely disguised its contempt. "Ma'am, we're not going to do this today," he said, pulling cuffs from his belt. "Let's make this quick." Sybil's brows furrowed. "You haven't even asked me what I'm doing here," she said. "You haven't seen my ID." "Don't need to," Devin replied, stepping closer. "Trespassing is trespassing." "This is my building," Sybil said again, for the third time in 24 hours. But her voice lacked force now. The repetition, the futility, was beginning to take its toll. Devin grabbed her wrist and turned her around, locking the cuffs as if she were a repeat offender. "Tell it to the judge," he said, nodding to Troy. "She'll cool off downtown." The humiliation stabbed deeper this time, not because of the act itself, but because it was so casual, so expected, so easy for them to do again. As she stood cuffed on the steps of her own property, the glass doors of Union Federal Bank swung open. Out walked Miranda Delch, the branch manager. Her navy skirt suit was pressed to perfection, her pearl earrings glinting beneath her sleek blonde bob. She paused at the top of the steps, taking in the scene. Troy turned to her and called, "Hey Miranda, recognize this lady?" Miranda peered at Sybil, her expression flat. "No," she said. "Never seen her before." The words sliced through Sybil like ice. They'd spoken before, briefly, at a tenant luncheon a year ago. Miranda had even shaken her hand and accepted a personal thank you letter when Dominion Partners approved a property tax reduction for Union Federal. But now, in the open, with cops and cameras nearby, Miranda distanced herself with surgical precision. "She says she owns the building," Troy said with a laugh. Miranda shook her head slowly. "I would know if the building owner was standing on our steps. She's not." Her voice was just loud enough for the nearby pedestrians to hear, just dismissive enough to add weight to Sybil's perceived irrelevance. The officers nodded. That was all the confirmation they needed. She hadn't even bothered to ice them. She had sat on her living room sofa for hours, the silence loud, her mind replaying every second on the steps of Aldwych Plaza. Every word Miranda said, every laugh Troy threw at her, every dismissive glance from Devin. But while she sat in stillness, the internet moved. Fast, ruthlessly. At exactly 9:42 p.m., a teenager named Khalil in a red hoodie had posted a 36-second clip of the incident. Shot from across the street on his phone, the video captured Sybil's second arrest in brutal detail. Her arms twisted behind her by Officer Slate, Troy sneering in the background, Miranda delivering her cold denial. Khalil had titled the video, "Another Day, Another Racist Mess." Woman gets dragged off her own steps for breathing while black. Within minutes, it had been reposted. 10,000 views in the first hour, 50,000 by midnight. By morning, it had crossed 3 million. The hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Aldwych Arrest. Hashtag She Owns It. Hashtag Justice for the Unknown Woman. Commentary exploded beneath the original video. Some users were outraged, posting screenshots of the building's public tax record, which still listed Sybil Mercer as the owning agent of record. Others were skeptical, suggesting she was exaggerating or faking ownership. But most were furious. The image of a dignified black woman being forcibly removed from a building she might actually own resonated like a siren across every platform. Sybil's phone buzzed nonstop, calls from board members, developers, friends, clients. Her assistant, Olivia, left 9 voicemails between midnight and dawn. But Sybil didn't answer. She watched everything unfold in real time, silent, hands resting on her knees. At 6 a.m., she brewed coffee, opened her laptop, and began taking notes. She wasn't reacting. She was planning. By 8 a.m., local media had picked up the story. But the coverage was cautious, clinical. Channel 9 News ran a segment titled "Unidentified Woman Detained After Suspicious Loitering Incident at Aldwych Plaza." The anchor used words like allegedly, reported, and possibly, spinning the story in favor of neutrality that tilted suspiciously toward the institution. They referred to Troy as a bank security officer responding to perceived threats. They quoted Officer Slate, who stated in a press briefing that the situation was handled by protocol. They even managed to feature a brief phone-in from Miranda Delch, who claimed she was caught off guard by a disruptive visitor. The segment aired 5 times before noon. Each time, Sybil's face was blurred. They didn't mention her name, not because they didn't know it, but because admitting who she really was would dismantle the entire narrative they were building. That she was not just a passerby, not just a protester or troublemaker, but the actual owner of the building they all worked in. The woman they humiliated twice in less than 24 hours was the force behind their leases, the power behind their paychecks. But the truth was too inconvenient, too embarrassing, too explosive. At 10:15 a.m., Olivia finally reached her. Sybil answered with a flat yes. "Ms. Mercer, are you seeing this? The video, I've seen it. Should I call PR? This is getting out of control." No, Sybil's voice was calm. "Let it burn." Olivia paused. "Ma'am, no statements," Sybil said. "No denial. No confirmations. Not yet." She closed the call, stood, and returned to her window. Below, the city looked the same. But it wasn't. Not anymore. That afternoon, a group of college students showed up outside Aldwych Plaza holding cardboard signs. "Respect Black ownership," one read. Another, "This is our building." By sunset, a small crowd had formed. Protesters, journalists, curious pedestrians. Still, Troy remained stationed at the steps, arms crossed, eyes defiant. Miranda hadn't left the building all day. Union Federal issued a bland statement about evaluating internal procedures, but it rang hollow. Inside her apartment, Sybil drafted a list. Names, dates, video timestamps, employee ID numbers, lease signatures. She pulled up emails from Miranda thanking her for hosting the tenant appreciation brunch last fall. She gathered internal memos from Troy requesting more surveillance equipment. They had watched the coverage. They had received calls from tenants, colleagues, and city officials, all curious, panicked, or pretending ignorance. Sybil took her place at the head of the table, calm but unreadable. Her appearance was as precise as ever, navy blue suit, gold necklace, hair pulled tightly back, but her eyes held a quiet storm. The silence broke when Avery Monroe, her lead counsel, spoke first. "We can file suit immediately. Civil rights violation, false detainment, racial profiling. We already have a dozen legal angles ready." He tapped a document in front of him. "We also have emails confirming Miranda's direct knowledge of your ownership. That alone invalidates her public statement." Sybil nodded slowly, her fingers laced in front of her. "How many properties do we control on that block?" "6, said Brielle, the firm's real estate compliance officer. "Aldwych Plaza, 2 satellite commercial units, the cafe on the east side, the private parking structure, and the rooftop garden lot leased by the city. Technically, you control more ground footage there than the bank itself." "And do we have updated footage from inside the bank?" "Yes, from our installed security system, not theirs," Brielle replied. "We got 3 angles. Troy engaging without provocation, Officer Slate initiating the arrest without questioning you, and Miranda explicitly denying recognition within view of a placard listing you as the developer. Sybil leaned back slightly in her chair. Good. Hold all of it. Don't release anything yet. Avery frowned. You don't want to go public? Not yet. But Sybil, wait, she said firmly. Let the story burn first. The room paused, watching her closely. They've built a lie, she continued. A public lie. I want that lie to grow roots. I want them to double down, to reinforce it. Because when I come forward, I want the weight of the truth to collapse everything they built. Not just in headlines. I want it to destroy their credibility. I want it to be irreversible. Her voice didn't rise, but every word carried force. If we act too soon, it becomes a legal squabble. A news cycle that lasts 3 days. If we wait, it becomes a reckoning. Brielle whispered, You're playing the long game. I always do, Sybil said. Always. They spent the next hour building a wall of information. Lease agreements, tenant communications, public and private footage, correspondence between Sybil's firm and Union Federal Bank leadership. The material was undeniable. Even if Troy, Miranda, or Officer Slate tried to revise their actions or issue apologies, Sybil's receipts would undercut them. Still, she instructed her team to sit on the evidence. She wanted the bank to stay quiet, Miranda to keep lying, and Troy to keep guarding a door he didn't know she could legally remove at any time. Outside, the protests grew. What had started as a group of students became a rally. Teachers, activists, city workers, and even a few quiet executives joined in over the following days. Signs read, Dignity has no dress code, respect black wealth, and this land is her land. Still, Sybil didn't speak to reporters. When approached outside Dominion's downtown office, she said only, no comment at this time. Her silence stirred more speculation. Online forums debated her identity. Some thought she was a political figure. Others theorized she was part of a corporate sting. Few guessed the truth. Meanwhile, Miranda Delch appeared on a local podcast, interviewed over Zoom. She doubled down, stating that her staff were only acting in the interest of safety, and that the woman in the video was not someone we'd ever had dealings with. Troy Bannon was quoted in a local blog defending his actions, claiming racial bias has nothing to do with enforcing rules, and that he'd do it again to protect the bank's reputation. Officer Slate remained quiet, but a source inside the department confirmed to Avery that Slate had issued an internal report framing Sybil as a possible agitator looking to provoke legal action. The lies kept stacking, and Sybil let them. Every email they sent, every public denial they gave, every quote they provided was another brick in the wall they were building around themselves. And she was patient. She had always been patient. At home, she studied the edits made to her Wikipedia page by internet sleuths trying to confirm her identity. Employees whispered about the video, unsure whether to defend their management or quietly distance themselves from it. Yet Miranda Delch, insulated by years of privilege and corporate protection, took no pause. Instead of introspection, she chose escalation. 3 days after the second incident, she distributed a new internal policy memo across the bank staff under her jurisdiction. The subject line read, Security Guidelines for Curbing Unauthorized Activity. The body of the email described a new zero-tolerance approach to loitering and non-client presence on bank property, and directed staff to notify security of any individual not actively engaged in financial services. Though never naming Sybil directly, the language was unmistakably targeted. One paragraph stated, No person, regardless of appearance, age, or background, is exempt from standard verification when remaining on the premises without clear purpose. Attached to the memo were photographs of previous loitering concerns, one of which included a blurred shot of Sybil from a week prior. Miranda, thinking herself clever, included only lower angles and partial views to avoid immediate backlash. But the implication was clear. The policy was about exclusion, not security. What Miranda didn't know, despite numerous tenant agreements signed under her oversight, was that Sybil was blind copied on all building-wide communications, including anything from major tenants like Union Federal. The moment the memo hit staff inboxes, Sybil received it, along with the attachment and sender metadata. She read it once, then archived it. She didn't need to respond. The damage would speak for itself in time. Meanwhile, Troy Bannon's arrogance took an even darker turn. Emboldened by media misdirection and Miranda's corporate endorsement, he participated in a private group chat with other local security personnel, several of whom rotated through other buildings Sybil owned. In this thread, filled with memes, insensitive jokes, and cynical banter, Troy uploaded a screenshot of Sybil's arrest. The caption read, "Put the freeloader in her place again today. She thought she was back to collect rent money. LOL." One of the guards responded with, "That's some real community service right there." Another added, "Can we get medals for cleaning up sidewalk trash?" They cheered him on, laughing at the video as though it were a comedy sketch, not a real act of humiliation against a woman of dignity. What they didn't know was that one of the guards in the thread, Malik Henderson, was uncomfortable. Young and recently hired, Malik had watched the viral footage and immediately sensed something wrong. He didn't laugh. He didn't reply. Instead, he saved the conversation, took screenshots, and forwarded them anonymously to Dominion Partners' legal inbox with the subject line, "Your team should see this." Sybil received the forwarded message the same evening. She read it in silence, her face unmoving. She studied every comment, every laughing emoji, every vile insinuation about her race, her status, her presence. Then she closed the file and saved it under a new folder labeled Final Phase. The cruelty didn't stop there. A week later, a small group of protesters, now organizing under the hashtag #StandWithSybil, gathered peacefully outside Aldwych Plaza. They held handmade signs, chanted for justice, and handed out pamphlets about systemic profiling in corporate spaces. Troy, still posted at the bank entrance, responded by filming the crowd on his phone and yelling "Get a job" between chuckles. Miranda, watching from inside, made no effort to intervene. Instead, she emailed building management, unaware that Sybil owned that account too, complaining that the unnecessary disruption was bad for client relations and needed to be addressed with property authority. Her tone dripped with the entitlement of someone who believed herself too high to fall. Sybil read every word. Still, she said nothing. Her lawyers compiled each piece. The group chat, the memo, the protest footage, the verbal abuse caught on live streams. She had evidence not just of discrimination, but of a culture that thrived on dehumanizing anyone who challenged its assumptions. And the more they acted, the more ammunition they handed her. Yet the public had begun to shift. While some news outlets still clung to neutral language, independent journalists dug deeper. One podcast exposed Miranda's ties to a real estate lobbying group known for pushing exclusionary zoning laws. Another linked Troy to prior complaints from other tenants about aggressive treatment toward Black visitors. Banners fluttered from the side scaffolds reading "Redevelopment Partnership Briefing, Media Welcome." Rumors had swirled all week. Tenants were told that the property owner would be delivering an important announcement regarding building policy and upcoming structural improvements. Speculation was rampant. Some assumed a corporate acquisition. Others thought a new developer was entering the scene to reshape the block. No one suspected the truth. Not Miranda Delch, who arrived in a navy blazer and neutral expression, arms crossed as she surveyed the scene. Not Troy Bannon, who stood beside her near the steps, arms folded, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his face, scanning the growing crowd like he was head of security for a Fortune 500 event. And certainly not the local news teams who gathered with cameras and microphones, each hoping for a juicy quote, unaware that they were about to be handed one of the most seismic narrative reversals in recent memory. At precisely 10 o'clock, a slim woman emerged from the building's west wing and walked confidently toward the podium. Her heels tapped in perfect rhythm, and every head turned as she climbed the 3 shallow steps and stood in full view of the courtyard. She wore a crimson suit tailored to perfection, her hair swept into a low bun, her expression calm but electric with purpose. Miranda's face froze, color draining instantly. Troy's mouth parted slightly, disbelief crawling across his features. Sybil Mercer stood before them, not with shame, not with apology, but with absolute, unapologetic authority. The murmurs began, journalists pointing, cameras clicking rapidly. The woman from the viral video, the so-called trespasser, the target of weeks of speculation. She stood at the podium, placed her notes gently on the surface, and leaned toward the microphone. "Good morning," she began, her voice smooth and unwavering. "My name is Sybil Mercer. I am the president of Dominion Partners, the primary stakeholder and development authority behind Aldwych Plaza, and 6 additional properties in this district." The crowd gasped audibly. Whispers rippled like wind through wheat. Miranda took a step back. Troy looked around, as though hoping someone would declare it a mistake. But the words had landed. "Some of you," Sybil continued, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, "know me only through a few grainy videos. You've seen me detained. You've seen me handcuffed. You've seen me silenced. What you haven't seen until now is the truth." She paused, letting the weight settle. "This plaza was designed, funded, and managed under my supervision. Every tile, every policy, every tenant contract bears the approval of my office. I am not new to this property. I am not a visitor. I am not lost. I am home." The crowd stood stunned. Even the reporters seemed unsure whether to ask questions or simply record. 2 weeks ago, she said, "I was forcibly removed from the front steps of my own building by a man who didn't recognize me, didn't ask for identification, and assumed that someone who looked like me could not possibly belong here. That man is employed by a bank that leases space for my firm. That bank is managed by an executive who, when asked if she knew me, publicly denied any knowledge, despite multiple documented interactions and personal correspondence." She turned slightly and met Miranda's gaze. Miranda stood paralyzed. Troy shifted uncomfortably. "I have waited," Sybil said, "and I have watched. I gave every party involved the opportunity to step forward, to apologize, to correct the record. They chose silence. They chose pride. And so now I choose accountability." She pulled a document from a folder in front of her. "Effective immediately, Union Federal Bank's lease at Aldwych Plaza is terminated under Clause 9.3, breach of Community Code. You have 60 days to vacate." Gasps exploded from the reporters. Cameras flashed. Miranda's eyes widened in horror. Troy took a half step forward, but froze, unable to process what he was hearing. "Additionally," Sybil continued, "all current security contracts managed by third-party vendors are under review. Personnel responsible for profiling and misconduct will not be retained. A full audit is underway. Names, records, and footage will be shared with legal counsel and made available to the public." She closed the folder. "You thought I was a nobody," she said, voice quiet but piercing. "You saw my skin, my silence, and made assumptions. But now I want you to see something else, the cost of injustice." A long silence followed. They ran glossy profiles filled with stock footage of ribbon cuttings and interviews from past years that had previously been ignored. Sybil, now confirmed to be the president of Marin Holdings, Dominion's parent firm, was no longer a mystery figure. She was a mogul with over $15 billion in assets under her purview and an ownership portfolio that included 10% of downtown real estate in the city. Every newspaper ran the photo of her at the podium, red suit glowing like armor, with her quote stamped underneath in bold. "To those who drag me from my own front steps, your lease expires today." The image became a symbol of resistance, resilience, and retribution. Social media ignited. Hashtags trended globally. Celebrities reposted the footage. Civil rights groups reached out for partnership. Students wrote essays about her. And Sybil, still composed, still measured, returned to her office the following morning without fanfare, declining all interview requests. Her work was not yet finished. The board of Union Federal Bank convened an emergency meeting that same evening. The footage had placed them in the center of an international PR nightmare. Investors demanded accountability. Regulators were circling, citing potential civil rights violations on leased property. And worst of all, thousands of customers had begun closing their accounts, citing ethical objections. Inside that meeting, The conversation was not about legal defense. It was about survival. Miranda Delch was summoned first. Her confidence had cracked. Her signature blazer hung looser on her frame, her hair not as precisely styled, her voice hoarse from repeated internal phone calls trying to contain the fallout. But containment was no longer possible. She tried to offer context. She tried to reframe her decisions as procedural. She blamed confusion, miscommunication, even misidentification. But the board was already holding a printed copy of her memo about unauthorized loitering. They had Sybil's email exchanges. They had the video. When they asked why she publicly denied knowing the owner of the building she operated from, Miranda offered no good answer. By the end of the meeting, she was informed that her employment was under formal review pending termination, and her building access was suspended effective immediately. She left in silence. Troy Bannon fared worse. The group chat screenshots, originally leaked by a whistleblower, had gone viral within hours. One image featured Troy boasting, "Gonna clean up the steps again if she shows her face." Nothing like seeing a freeloader in cuffs. Another read, "She should be grateful. At least we didn't tase her." The language was crude, inflammatory, and devastating. The bank had no choice but to terminate Troy's contract immediately. They didn't even call him in. He found out through an HR email marked urgent. His access badge was deactivated before he could enter the building the next morning. He stood outside the now infamous steps with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, blinking at the doors that refused to open for him. Protesters gathered around him instantly. Some jeered, some filmed, others simply watched, arms folded, remembering. The footage of Troy walking away down the street, alone and disgraced, was poetic justice for many. For Sybil, it was simply one more piece of a long correction. Inside Aldwych Plaza, things were changing fast. Formerly silent tenants issued public apologies to Sybil. Anonymous bank employees began leaking internal documents to journalists, exposing a culture of quiet prejudice and selective customer service policies. One email revealed a directive to discourage loitering from non-clients appearing disheveled or disruptive, with a photo attached that showed a young black man standing in line. Another leaked recording captured a private meeting where Miranda referred to protesters as overly sensitive troublemakers. Each revelation further eroded Union Federal's public credibility. Outside, the protests continued to swell. Signs read, "Black leadership is not trespassing, and respect requires recognition." Sybil watched the footage nightly, not to gloat, but to monitor the shift in momentum. She instructed her team to stay focused, to continue the audits, and to push for formal reviews of all tenant behavior policies across every property Marin Holdings controlled. She didn't want a moment. She wanted a standard, one that could be enforced. The city's mayor reached out requesting a meeting. 3 nonprofit directors offered to partner on a diversity initiative using her properties as inclusive models. Even a major competitor reached out with a veiled offer to purchase one of her newly vacant units, an offer she declined without hesitation. She was not here to sell. She was here to lead. Marin Holdings, Sybil's parent company, had not merely exposed the misconduct, it had documented, time-stamped, and verified it. Her legal team submitted formal complaints to the City Council, regulatory commissions, and business ethics boards, each loaded with video evidence, internal emails, tenant violations, and witness affidavits. The time for silence had ended. The consequences began. For Troy Bannon, the reckoning was immediate and brutal. Every security agency in the metro area, both private and city contracted, quietly placed him on an unofficial blacklist. His name, once passed around barrooms and bowling alleys with casual confidence, was now whispered in hushed tones, usually followed by "don't even touch that liability." Applications for even basic positions were rejected without interviews. His licenses were frozen pending conduct reviews, and his attempt to join a less regulated firm was blocked when an anonymous source forwarded screenshots from the group chat he once considered harmless. What hurt more was the betrayal from within. Several of his former colleagues, eager to distance themselves, publicly condemned his actions and leaked further audio clips of locker room-style conversations where he bragged about clearing out street trash and mocked minority customers. He became a symbol of disgrace. But the most unexpected blow came not from a corporate world, but from a letter taped to the front door of his apartment. Notice of lease termination, effective in 30 days. The letter was signed by the managing agent of the property, which was listed under a shell company controlled entirely by Marin Holdings. The same woman he dragged from her own property now owned the building where he slept. And now, even that space was being taken away. Troy crumpled the paper, threw it across the hallway, then slumped against the door, head in his hands. He had no recourse, no leverage, no allies. Every step he took in arrogance had led him here, to irrelevance. For Miranda Delch, the unraveling was slower, but far more public. After her suspension, the formal investigation into her behavior gained momentum. Civil rights groups filed joint complaints citing racial discrimination, creating enough noise to attract federal scrutiny. A city ethics committee issued subpoenas for her email records and financial statements, and a hearing was scheduled to determine whether she knowingly lied about her interactions with Sybil Mercer. The evidence was damning. Emails recovered from Union Federal servers showed multiple direct communications between Miranda and Sybil over the course of 3 years. One, dated less than a year prior to the arrest, included a thank you note from Miranda to Sybil for hosting a leaseholder's breakfast. Another revealed that Miranda had approved lobby signage displaying Marin Holdings branding and Sybil's name beneath it. These communications directly contradicted her televised claim that she had no prior knowledge of the woman arrested outside her bank. It was perjury, not just publicly but legally. The subpoena required her appearance before the city's Business Conduct Review Board, where her resignation would be considered in tandem with a full revocation of her professional license. Privately, Miranda attempted to settle. She reached out to Sybil's legal counsel with a proposal, a public apology in exchange for leniency. Sybil declined to respond. The silence said more than words ever could. On social media, Miranda's name trended under hashtags like #BankingBias and #LiesHaveLeases, and former colleagues began distancing themselves, removing LinkedIn connections and purging photo tags. She tried to rebrand, contacting a PR firm to rebuild her image, but they refused the contract. "We don't represent clients under federal investigation," the firm's rejection email stated plainly. Her fall from grace was not just professional, it was personal. She became an example, a case study in privilege turned parasite, someone who mistook status for immunity and learned too late that paper walls collapse easily under truth. Meanwhile, Marin Holdings surged. Investor confidence rose. Properties previously considered peripheral were now seen as flagship symbols of ethical corporate stewardship. Sybil's internal policies were requested by other firms seeking to emulate her standard of transparency. Tenant turnover decreased, applications increased, and civic leaders sought her input on zoning reforms and inclusive urban development strategies. But Sybil wasn't interested in praise. She was focused on permanence. Quietly, she expanded her firm's auditing branch, tasking them with reviewing every existing lease, every hired contractor, every partner agency. She instructed her team to look for patterns, subtle ones, the ones often ignored until someone like her was dragged off a granite step for looking out of place. For Sybil, the goal wasn't vindication. It was prevention. 6 months had passed since Sybil Mercer stepped onto the podium and dismantled the narrative that once sought to erase her. In that time, the city had changed, not overnight, not in grand revolutions, but in slow, deliberate turns that mattered. Her quiet reforms had taken root. The properties under Marin Holdings adopted clear codes of conduct, not just against discrimination, but in favor of inclusion. Training programs were rewritten, not to check boxes, but to teach empathy, to confront assumptions, to educate on presence and power. Tenants who once operated under unspoken biases were now required to engage in community forums, to listen, to learn. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And in that spirit, The Civic Equity Alliance invited Sybil to be the keynote speaker at a citywide conference on ownership, access, and diversity. The panel was hosted in the very heart of downtown, inside a repurposed cathedral-turned venue. Its stained glass windows filtering sunlight onto wooden pews now filled with lawmakers, business leaders, educators, and residents. The event was open to the public, and by the time Sybil arrived, graceful in a navy dress and gold cuffs, the room was already at capacity. She stepped through the back hallway, was greeted by volunteers with reverence, and took her seat on stage beside other panelists. The host introduced her with proper due, president of Marin Holdings, community architect, and advocate for justice in real estate equity. Sybil nodded politely, but her gaze moved through the room, scanning faces, pausing only briefly when she spotted Miranda Delch seated 3 rows back. Miranda looked different, no longer perfectly coiffed, no longer armored in corporate chic. Her posture was humbler, her expression sincere. She had come quietly, with no press, no entourage. Sybil had heard through mutual contacts that Miranda had taken a leave from finance and begun volunteering with local equity outreach groups. She had issued a written apology months ago, not for public redemption, but for private atonement. She had asked for no media coverage, made no excuses, and never tried to contact Sybil directly. Instead, she listened. She showed up. She worked. Sybil respected that more than words. Further back, standing along the wall near the exit, was another face she recognized, Troy Bannon, dressed in a plain shirt and security vest, not from a corporation this time, but from a city-sponsored community watch initiative. He had taken a position with a neighborhood program focused on de-escalation training, reentry support, and restorative patrol methods. Sybil had not intervened to help him find work, nor had she prevented it. But she had made one request during her audit reforms, that anyone involved in her case be excluded from positions of authority unless they first completed a year of equity rehabilitation. Troy had complied, not publicly, not defiantly, quietly. He never reached out. But now he stood there, holding a clipboard and watching her, not with defiance, not with shame, but with awareness. And that, she thought, was enough. The host gave her the microphone. Sybil rose, turned toward the audience, and let her voice fill the high-ceiling chamber. We are taught to believe that justice is about punishment, that it is the swift arm of consequence. And yes, consequences matter. But justice, she said, real justice, is not vengeance. It's not humiliation. It's recognition. It's repair. It's rising together. She let that sink in. I was once removed from my own property because I was unseen, because my presence did not match their perception of ownership. That moment broke something, not just for me, but for all who saw it and knew it wasn't rare. That kind of erasure happens daily. But what we do after, that's the test. Not just for those who cause harm, but for those who hold power. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd again. I did not speak to destroy reputations. I spoke to reveal truth, to demand better, to remind the world that power does not always look like what you expect. And dignity is not something to be granted. It is something we are born with. All of us. The applause began before she could continue. Not out of politeness, but out of shared breath, shared truth, a collective realization that they had all seen something undeniable. Sybil smiled, just slightly, then concluded, justice is not the end of a story. It is the start of a better one, for everyone willing to write it with honesty. She stepped back from the mic as the room stood. Miranda clapped, quietly at first, then fully. Troy remained by the wall, still and steady, then nodded once, a gesture small but heavy. And Sybil exited the stage not as a symbol, not as a victim, but as a force. The city had watched her fall, watched her rise, and now it would follow her lead. Because she had shown them that the greatest power wasn't in fighting back with anger, but in standing firm in truth, creating change, and showing the world how to rise without stepping on anyone to do it. The end. If you found this story powerful and want to see more narratives that dig deep into justice, transformation, and redemption, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps keep these stories going strong. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Sybil's journey impacted you the most? And how did you feel when the truth finally came out? Drop your comments below and let me know where you're watching from. I'm always curious to see where these stories are reaching. Let's talk about the plot, the twists, and the moments that hit hardest.